So what I've got here is the Stanford Dragon from the Stanford Scanning Repository. Both the Dragon and the ground are in the default grey material, and currently we've got the default Bryce lighting. And the aim in this video is to show you what happens if we modify the material, and I'm going to give it metallicity and reflection, and I'm just going to get rid of the diffuse, and I'll show you what happens if we just put sort of a brown colour in here. If we modify the material so it's more reflective and more metallic than is normally allowed in the Bryce Material Lab. So in this render, what I hope you can see is that the colour that's been assigned to the diffuse channel is coming through more so when the angle of view is perpendicular to the surface we're looking at. So here where the view is perpendicular to the side of the dragon, it looks quite browny coloured, and where it's glancing off at an angle like here or towards the horizon, you can see more of the sky colours coming through. So that's the operation of reflection and metallicity. Now if we use this little trick where we can drive these channels much further than are normally allowed, so I'll put a blob in there and a blob in there, and then modify this function here. So I'm going to start from scratch to show you how it's done. You can already see some of the effect we'll be heading for because it's pulled this one out at random. So hold the shift key down and click on the name, then go down to basic and select check blue. We'll modify this one. So in the deep texture editor, what you want to do is just click on these corners to bring in the controls. We don't want any phase, we're just going to look at the noise. We're not going to have any color output or bump output. So click on the noise here and modify the function so it's distance squared. It wants to be minimum and octaves of 1. These settings are okay, it needs to be 3D and that's fine. We just need the frequency to be -1. And the result of that is this output, which you can't display properly, but you'll see that it's got these sort of different coloured diagonal lines, is very negative. Far more negative than you would normally be capable of having an output. Now we need to make this a positive output. We need to bring it down a bit because it's got to come into a range where it's useful, and if we just make it positive, it'll be so far out of range we won't be able to use any of the controls in the Material Lab to bring it back under control. So we have to do a bit of the work here. So I'm going to take this component and transfer it to component 2, and then use difference and set it so that it's got no output. So that's nothing, just turn the octaves to 0. And the result of that, if we put a sign in here, is, and set it down to 0, we'll do that now, is that this will now be positive. The reason I've put that in is because I'm going to be using a sine function in the next component, and I'm just going to take that across there, make sure I've selected that component and set this to multiply. And by having the sine component here, if I just reset that, by using multiply and modifying this value, I can multiply the very high, what is now positive output, down into a useful range. And the clue is here. When we start to slide this down, you'll see the bands start to separate out. And what you really need is just some colour here, some bands. So get that as low as possible while you get an output, and that output will be in a useful range, hopefully. So you can see I've got some colour and there's a bit of gradation. So now we can check this output in the Material Lab. So just check out of there, and if I use alpha scaling, which is selected as it happens, so we want that, we can use this to scale the outputs up and down. Now it looks black now, and this is a result of the metallicity being driven so hard. So if I just turn that off briefly, you see it looks white, and that's because the reflection's being driven so hard. What's happening is it's taking the light in and reflecting it, because the reflection's over 100%, it amplifies the light as it's reflected. And metallicity has a damping effect through the diffuse colour, so we can balance these two off against one another if we can just find the right values. And by using alpha scaling, we can use these values here to scale them up and down. So we'll open our experiments at 5 and 5. So that still looks dark, so I'll go 0.2. You can see now a bit of specular highlight appears because you get specular as a result of adding reflection. If you don't want to get rid of that, you just set the specular to fully black. So still at the moment we've got, right, okay, so we've got more reflection. You can see the reflection scaling up now, and the metallicity is not having that much effect. So it's a matter of balancing these two off against one another. Okay, so that's what you're looking for. So you want enough reflection to drive it to be fully white around the outside, and then a hole in the middle, because where it's transferring the diffuse colour through, it's it's actually damping the effect of the reflection to the point where it looks very dark, and because it's being driven beyond its ordinary range, it starts sucking light out of the reflected surface. So that's the effect. Now let's see what it looks like on our render. Okay, so it's all a bit burned out here. There's too much light, and as I said, we're just going to use reflection properties. So what I'm going to do is in sky and fog, I'm going to turn the atmosphere off and set the sky to fully black. I'm going to just turn the sun off here because I don't need any extra processing for the shadows. So now you'll see everything's dark, which is what I wanted. And then I'm going to generate the light within the material by using the ambient channel. Now the ambient channel is going to light things up and going to make things bright again. But the thing is, because this is a multiplying effect, what I can do is then take the global ambient control, which works through the ambient channel, and set that down so that the light output is very low. So it'll look black on the monitor. You won't really see this effect, but it'll be enough to drive the material properties. So now you can see we're getting a lighting effect from apparently nowhere that's coming through the reflection. It looks a bit dark here, so if I wanted to emphasize that, I would need to either reduce the metallicity so it's not sucking so much light out, or increase the amount of reflection property. So you can see now the colour is not as pronounced as it was. If I want to increase reflection, it's already set high. I'm going to have to go back into here and fiddle with this very carefully. So I'll get a little bit of a band showing. Oh, it's going to probably be too much. This is the faffiest bit, so you can see there's a bit of a transition there, and that'll have increased the power of the output, which should allow me to have more reflection, but it will also increase the amount of metallic effect. So this value will have to be changed again and make it smaller, try and get it back into the range where you see the hole in the middle, but now we'll have more reflection, so the effect should be brighter. So you can see now it's got an interesting gradient on the reflection, and we're getting a bit more lighting effects in there. So obviously, the more you use this material in objects around your scene, the more light will be generated by this process, and the more light will appear in your scene. Obviously, because it's reflection, it has an overhead in terms of processing, because it's got to calculate all the light bounces off the reflective surface. But because it's using no direct light or specular light, then it's fairly efficient because it's not calculating any shadow region. So it gives an interesting effect on the material surface, and an effect that I'm not aware that can be created in any other way other than exploiting this process that allows you to create a very high output. And as you've seen here, it's render efficient enough for me to do the final render on the screen before I've even finished talking. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. You'll have a go with that effect, and I wish Windows would leave me alone while I'm recording these videos. Okay then, cheers now.